Anything else you want to kind of talk about in terms of like the NFL meta, how that's going to affect the way that you're building stacks going into 2026?
Yeah, way fewer onslaught stacks where you're taking, basically going all in on one game. You could probably count on one hand where that was optimal this year, and I bet both times it included Lions. Not only, are we probably doing fewer onslaught stacks where you're taking, 5 to 6 players from both teams in one game, just taking quarterback and running back from the same team. This has certainly been a hole in my game and something that I've got to get better on. If there's, maybe 1 or 2 teams on the slate that are implied to score 27 to 28 points, and then there's 5 to 6 that are all just kind of good but not great, between 24 and 22 points, then yeah, it might just make more sense to just go all in on that one offense. So I think that is certainly going to be a way we're going to see, higher scoring lineups.
Welcome to the off-season editions of DFS Deep Dive, where our experts pull back the curtain on how they and you can leverage all our tools at Fantasy Points DFS to level up your process and make money. I'm Ryan Heath, joined today by Graham Barfield, and today we're discussing game stacking. What is it and why do we do it? How can you identify the best games to stack in a given week? And what are some of the best ways to actually build a game stack? We'll cover all of that today. But first, I've got to tell you that if you want access to these most accurate projections in the industry, all our DFS content like Scott Barrett's Slate Breakdown, my advanced matchups, and all of our UFL DFS content and projections from Jake Tribbey, you've got to go to fantasypoints.com/plans and use code DEEP26. That's DEEP26 at checkout. That'll give you access to every DFS article and tool through the end of March 2027. And we know this stuff works. We've had a subscriber win the Millie Maker during each of the past 3 years. So again, promo code DEEP26 at checkout. Let's get into game stacking, Graham. So just kind of quickly to set the parameters of the conversation, what is a game stack for anybody who might be new to DFS? Whenever we say game stack, we're talking about putting one or more players from both teams within a game into your DFS lineup. But yeah, Graham, talk to me a bit about game stacking, why it's something we want to look to do.
Right, so game stacking is solving pieces of the puzzle in a way that kind of, gives you parameters for lineup building. So as opposed to just going through and picking out, hey, these are the top 3 projected receivers that all fit together, these are the top 2 projected running backs that fit together, you're basically solving pieces of the puzzle instantaneously by taking the top scoring team, what you believe to be the top scoring team. So let's call it the team's quarterback, Josh Allen. This actually might be a pretty bad example because Josh Allen's very hard to stack, but Josh Allen and Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, all 3 of them, let's say they project to be the top receivers. And that week, the Bills are playing the Chiefs. The game total is, Ryan, let's call it, 54, 53 and a half? That game probably would be. A game stack would be something like Josh Allen plus one of those 2 receivers, Kincaid and Shakir, and then you're bringing it back with a Chief. This is, again, you're basically, the best way I've heard it described is JM to win, put it pretty bluntly on a pod I was listening to him a couple years ago. It's, you're basically just trying to solve pieces of the puzzle and then, create a lineup where you're only having to solve 5 or 6 uncorrelated single pieces as opposed to trying to solve for 11 uncorrelated pieces. And with game stacks, you can get there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. There's a big changes in the NFL meta too that we should probably talk about. But generally speaking, when we talk through game stacks, you and I on Cashing Points with Jake, we have game stack discussions in our articles. It is typically through the lens of the quarterback, receivers, and then the bringbacks on the other side. And we'll save this for later in the show, but I think there's a different way to kind of think through some of these game stacks. But that's 8 times out of 10, that's the way we're thinking through it.
On the theory side of that, I do think it's really huge to think of it as reducing the number of things that you need to get right within a lineup. The whole point of game stacking is in these games where both offenses are having to keep pace with each other, the defenses are suspect, then the scoring on either side of the game becomes correlated. If players on one team are scoring a lot of fantasy points, players on the other team are going to come back and do the same. And yeah, you're kind of looking to hit on these games that completely shoot out for 55 or more combined points. There is very often at least one of those on your typical NFL main slate. Yeah, we had like Ravens Bills in week 1, Bears 49ers later in the year. Like there are just so many examples of this. So yeah, that's why we care about it. The number one thing you should be looking at in terms of which game to stack, deciding which direction to go, is the Vegas over-under. That's kind of the best tool we have for deciding how many points are likely to be scored in this game. Of course, that's sometimes going to come through in projected ownership. Everybody might want to stack Bills Chiefs, as you said, if it's a 53.5 over-under. Yeah, especially in contrast to ownership, it's really great to just look through Vegas over-unders as you're putting your lineups together. Another thing I want to highlight, that just because it's a tool in the Fantasy Points data suite that I think is really valuable for choosing which game to stack, is our pass rate over expectation tool. We can pull it up on screen here, but basically what this tool is showing you is we have it week by week, but you can also just sort by the full season. This is showing you, given a certain game situation, are teams choosing to pass or to run more often compared to what teams typically do. So the teams up at the top with all the green numbers, these are teams that are often choosing to pass on offense. We have the same thing for defense with the defense tab in the top right as well. So one really good way to look for sneaky shootout potential games is a very pass-heavy offense, an offense that's always choosing to pass, going up against a defense that offenses often choose to pass on. And if you have two kind of matches like that within a game, even better. That makes it more likely that both teams are going to be passing a lot. If they're succeeding, that probably turns into a shootout. Anything else you want to add, Graham, just on deciding which games are good to game stack, figuring out which ones to target?
I always love your P-row angles. You always do a good job of this when you write up advanced matchups or caching points. So I love your angles on that. Just the final point on just game stacking and just this past year, like we generally saw lower over-unders than usual, just slightly lower. So a lot of the times, man, we would see ownership kind of basically base around, just a few games, as opposed to in the past we'd have multiple games on main slates where games we'd have, 3-4 games with totals of 48.5. This past year, we might only have 1 or 2. The meta this year was certainly like to kind of get away from some of the more popular game stacks most weeks. One way to kind of identify some under-owned game stacks is just this exact method. Just find the games that's, 45, 46, 47 total, like good over-unders, but not great, not the highest on the slate. But we've got two teams like up in pace, teams that either throw a ton or allow a ton of passes, either because their run defense is really, really good or their pass defense is really, really bad, or both, like the Dallas Cowboys this past year. So I loved this angle, and I think there's definitely some ways to kind of like, explore these game stacks through this lens, as opposed to, everybody follows the Vegas over-unders. There's a reason why they're generally very directionally accurate. There's a reason why very few models out there can actually beat the Vegas lines, like very, very few models. So yeah, we all use them, and finding kind of like these under-owned ways to build lineups is certainly the way to go when you're building DFS lineups.
Yeah, just anything that's kind of different that everybody isn't looking at, I think can be really valuable, if it has like any sort of directional accuracy to it. So yeah, that's why I like P-row. We talk about pace, just seconds per play, plays per game as well a lot in our content throughout the week. Obviously, I talk about it where it matters in advanced matchups. Nick Spinola's Coverage Shells article often brings this up. We'll talk about it on caching points if it's relevant. But yeah, those are just some other ancillary ways to identify games to stack. But let's get into like what I think is like the most interesting part of this whole game stacking conversation, Graham, and that's really once you've decided which game to stack, how do you build the stack? What players are you putting into it? How many players from each side of a game? Are you choosing to stack wide receiver versus opposing RB? Like, just talk to me about your general process for building the actual game stacks and anything you're considering here.
So I think I mentioned it earlier, but the way I used to think through game stacks was very linear, like quarterback, receiver, tight end, maybe two of them, and then a bring back on the other side. Either you're bringing, we could call it a double stack all the time. It's a quarterback plus a receiver and a tight end, and then bring back on the other side. I think, in general, that's what you see a lot of the times at the top of leaderboards on DK, but I think maybe something that was a flaw in my game and something that I'm trying to get better at this coming season is not necessarily thinking of game stacks through like a quarterback receiver lens so much. And it's actually more so thinking about them through the running backs first. So it's a two-pronged thing, Ryan, like just generally speaking, like when we're working on projections and going through the best players on each slate, if you were to stack up the 15 best plays on each slate, running backs and receivers, on a given week, I'd bet 10 of them were running backs versus 5 receivers. So it's a little bit of a scarcity thing, this conversation. And then secondarily, it's like of those 5 receivers, like they are projecting so much better than the wide receiver 2 and 3 cohort that they are just like exponentially more valuable. So I think this year I kind of refocused my lineup building process to basically narrow down my player pool to the running backs that I think are optimal first. And then how do I get one of these 5 best receiver plays on there? And if it happens to be a game stack, that's great. I think in general, when we're talking about, the new NFL, there's just like very few games that project extremely well and have a chance of shooting out. So that we need to think of like setting our lineups as like a base of fantasy points first. And again, that needs to come through the lens of running backs. Secondarily, when we're building game stacks, I think a lot of the times, again, it's like quarterback plus receiver plus the bring back. I think we actually should probably flip that on its head and build more through, hey, what's the most optimal running back and how do I build a lineup that makes sense, has a story around it, around this running back, and what does that look like? So like when Christian McCaffrey is projecting for 28 points, is the offense on the other side good? Like, can they push? And if they can, and they can push, and this game stays close and the 49ers do win and McCaffrey gets his 28 points, what does the quarterback and receiver scoring on the other side look like? If the Niners are putting up a ton of points and they're, McCaffrey has 2 touchdowns, maybe Purdy has 2 touchdowns, the Niners scored nearly 30, offensive points, they're pushing the other team. Can this game shoot out? And I think when we're kind of thinking through some of these like, contrarian ways and like different ways to get, high scoring points at low ownership, which is kind of the whole point of game stacking, it really does need to be through running backs first. And on DraftKings this year in particular, we saw, Ryan, like how many slates do we have in the back half of the year where there were just like 3 or 4 legitimately great cheap quarterbacks. And it just made so much sense to like pay up at running back, pay down at quarterback. And if you could pay down at quarterback and build a good game stack around those cheap quarterbacks, even better. And one call that you had that stuck out to me on cashing points, like you loved Tyrod Taylor that week that the Jets, I can't remember who they played, but there was a week that the Jets and like all of his receivers projected really well. And like that week it was like Tyrod Taylor, Tyler Shook, both the low-owned quarterbacks that we both liked, both hit. And that week was literally just like if you had one of those 2 plus one of the receivers and the running backs, like you kind of won everything. And I think in the past, it was really just came down to like which game stack went off. And it was like, okay, you had 5 or 6 pieces from that game stack. You most likely did extremely well, especially if you were pretty optimal with your other 5 or 6 pieces in your lineup. Now it's more like, man, there's only like 2 or 3 optimal plays from this game stack just because teams aren't scoring as much, yardage is down. Maybe we really should just be thinking of this through the running backs first, since they're all, they're scoring the most fantasy points.
Yeah, I absolutely love. I love this angle. This is great. And I would encourage people to try, if you are the type of player where if you're building an entry and you start with, okay, this is the double stack and the bring back I want to play, and then start fitting stuff around it. Yeah, I would challenge you to, as Graham says, start with the 3 best running back plays on the slate, or that you want to fit around them. Just because, especially as the passing game, especially the explosive passing game, kind of declines in the NFL over the past few seasons. Running back scoring comes up. The middle class of the wide receiver position is kind of disappearing, as I've talked about on several other shows, and we might talk about on this feed some as well. As all of these things happen, the good plays are a lot narrower. And it really should be your first priority to get to the good running back and wide receiver plays. Another thing in there you mentioned that I think is kind of underappreciated is just stacking with the running back or through the running back. It's especially good for obviously the pass catching types of running backs, your Brock Purdy plus Christian McCaffrey type of stacks. Yeah, your Kirk Cousins plus Bijan Robinson, that type of thing works and is great, obviously. But even thinking back to 2024, there were multiple weeks, if I'm remembering correctly, where Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry were optimal together in the same week, which overall, that's probably negatively correlated over the entirety of the last 5 years, QB plus running back that isn't used in the passing game. But for some of these offenses, especially as offense overall declines in the NFL, if there are a few of them where you legitimately can stack up the quarterback and the running back, and that's going to be on average less popular in the field because that's not typically how people think of building stacks and of just playing DFS, then that's really good. That's something you want to look out for opportunities to do. So I think a big theme here really is that how you build stacks should be responding to the slate.
Exactly.
If we have all of these cheap sub 5K quarterbacks that you can build the gross cheap stacks around and get to all the great plays, then amazing. If it's a slate that's becoming rarer and rarer, but if there are legitimately 3 or 4 games above a 50-point over-under, you can count the number of times that happened this past year on one hand. And then maybe you want to go a little bit more classic, traditional with how you build your stacks in terms of, there are a lot of good offenses. One of them or 2 of them together are probably going to go off. But I think that's right, that as we enter this era of the NFL where defenses kind of have the upper hand on offenses, I think it does make sense to adjust how aggressive you're being with those game stacks in response to that. Graham, is there anything else you want to kind of talk about in terms of the NFL meta and how that's going to affect the way that you're building stacks going into 2026?
Yeah, way fewer onslaught stacks where you're taking, basically going all in on one game. There's just, like you said, you could probably count on one hand where that was optimal this year. And I'd bet both times it included Lions. So it's not only, are we probably doing fewer onslaught stacks where you're taking, 5 to 6 players from both teams in one game. I think you probably should be doing what you're outlining, just taking quarterback and running back from the same team. This has certainly been a hole in my game and something that I've got to get better on. It's like what you just said. If there's very few teams, if there's, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 teams on the slate that are implied to score 27 to 28 points, and then there's 5 to 6 that are all just kind of good but not great, between 24 and, 22 points, then it might just make more sense to just go all in on that one offense. So I think that right there, what you outlined is certainly going to be a way we're going to see, higher scoring lineups on DraftKings, especially because, with the decline in pass rates, Ryan, we've seen basically last year, we had a 54% pass rate. It was the lowest we've had in 18 years. And it was anywhere from 2 to 3% below the average in 2010s. And with that, you're thinking, 2 to 3%, not a big deal. But it's a huge deal, especially when it comes to touchdown scoring. And at the end of the day, like you and I, like we go super deep into the weeds with every possible fantasy points data, metric that we can. We're going way deep in the woods on just like, just general like non-quantifiable stuff in terms of injuries and just, coaching changes and stuff. We're really just chasing touchdowns here, y'all. Like that really is kind of what it comes down to. And what this all means to me, like with the decrease in passing, increase in rushing, all means there's going to be more running back touchdowns. And again, I think that just means you probably should be building around your running back game stacks more. And just as a final takeaway, this probably means more running back and receiver mini stacks, where like the running back from the team that's favored, let's just stick with the Niners example, say the Niners are playing the Seahawks, you should probably be building a lot more like McCaffrey, JSN, mini stacks with no quarterbacks. And just say all of the touchdowns are going to flow through McCaffrey on the Niners side, and JSN is going to be, JSN. It's a super like easy rudimentary example. But if, you continue to like go down this logical path where quarterback scoring goes down, receiver scoring on the high end stays relatively the same. Like we've got JSN, Chase, Puka all producing within usual outcomes of like, 35, 40 point games, like 1 to 2 times a year. That's pretty normal. We should just be building like a lot of running back receiver minis, I think.
Yeah, that's a really great point on the mini stacks in particular. You don't have to like go all into this game environment is going to totally go off, especially if it's the type of slate where there might be cheaper quarterbacks that are better values, that are more enticing. Like you need to fit in some of these higher priced running backs and wide receivers. I think it can be viable to take like 2 like more mid-priced wide receivers or running backs and just mini stack them against each other. There were a lot of hits on that this past season where you didn't have to get to the full like Baker Mayfield plus Mike Evans plus Ibuka or whatever with the Rico Dowdle bring back. Like you could just do the Dowdle plus Evans mini. I might be totally making up outcomes there. I can't remember. I don't know if those two scored
that's
a
a
lot
great
when
example,
they played each other. But yeah, that's the type of thing I'm looking to do, especially for these more like mid-tier over-under games. If it's like a 44 to like a 47 point over-under, where it's like there's maybe not enough juice for this to like get out ahead of the entire slate, but enough for a player that consolidates a lot of the opportunity to post a tournament winning score on each side, then yeah, that I really just very purposefully in my process, I'm always like, okay, what are my 3 or 4 favorite mini stacks this week? And I try to keep that in mind when I'm building to kind of mix them in, if I'm hand building at least, or even if I'm going through the opto, how much of these do I have? So yeah, mini stacks are, I think, better, more important than they used to be.
We'll tease a little bit here. We're going to talk single entry versus like 150 max strategy on a separate pod. And when you're game stacking, I think choosing the correct game stack and game stacking theory is incredibly important when it comes to contest selection. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in our next show, single entry versus 150 max. But I think contest selection is part of the equation here that matters more when you're looking for upside in the highest end of outcomes in terms of like your fantasy points upside. It makes probably more sense to do the full game stacks as opposed to doing mini stacks and single entries, for example.
Yeah, 100% agree. And yeah, excited to get into that on some of these other pods with you, Graham. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today on DFS Deep Dive. If this discussion has intrigued you, if you're ready to take the next step into the world of Fantasy Points DFS, again, you can head over to fantasypoints.com and subscribe for the upcoming season. Using promo code DEEP26, our Fantasy Pro package will run all the way through March 2027. You will get everything for the upcoming UFL spring football season as well that starts in late March 2026. You'll get the entire 2026 NFL season. You can get into our subscriber Discord, talk to me, talk to Graham, talk to Scott Barrett, talk to all of our analysts, or you can even go for the fantasy bundle subscription. We showed off the Fantasy Points data suite a little bit in this episode. That'll give you access to that, all of our other content at Fantasy Points. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboard.